He was my stepbrother. But that night, everything changed. When my mother married his father, I never imagined how completely it would rearrange the quiet rhythm of my life. I had always been independent, focused on finishing my degree and getting out into the world, but suddenly there was another presence in the house, steady, composed, older by 2 years, and carrying himself with that quiet confidence that always makes people pay attention without knowing why. His name was Ethan. He wasn't loud or demanding, he just had this calm way of observing everything, like he was always one thought ahead of everyone else. From the first day, something about him made me uneasy, not because he was unfriendly, but because he saw too much. When he looked at me, I felt like all the walls I'd built around myself were suddenly transparent. The first months after our parents' wedding felt awkward. The house was beautiful, newly renovated, full of new beginnings and second chances, but for me it felt like living inside a pause. My mother was happier than I'd ever seen her, and I wanted to be happy for her, but every time Ethan walked into the room, the air seemed to shift. We spoke politely, pass the salt, good morning, see you later, but beneath the politeness there was something else. The kind of awareness that makes you self-conscious about even breathing too loudly. Sometimes, I caught him looking at me, not inappropriately, but with a kind of curiosity that mirrored my own. And I'd look away first, telling myself not to be ridiculous. One rainy evening, he found me struggling to carry a heavy box of books to my room. "You'll hurt yourself," he said quietly, taking the box from my hands before I could protest. His fingers brushed mine, barely, for a second, and I felt that tiny spark of contact all the way to my chest. I laughed to hide it. "Thanks," I muttered, pretending to fuss with my hair. He just nodded, set the box down, and said, "You don't have to do everything alone." It was such an ordinary thing to say, yet it stayed with me long after he'd gone back downstairs. Weeks turned into months. We settled into an unspoken rhythm, shared breakfasts, silent car rides to the grocery store, evenings spent in separate corners of the living room, pretending to read or watch something while actually listening to each other's breathing. The awareness between us grew heavier, not lighter. Friends would visit, and I'd catch Ethan watching from the window when one of them hugged me goodbye. When his coworkers invited him out, I told myself I didn't care whom he saw, but my stomach tightened every time he mentioned a woman's name. It was ridiculous. He was my stepbrother. We were supposed to be family. But feelings don't listen to rules. They grow in silence, in glances, in all the tiny spaces where words should have been. One night, I couldn't sleep and went downstairs for water. The house was quiet except for the rain against the windows. I found Ethan sitting on the couch, laptop open, a soft lamp casting gold light over his face. He looked up, surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" I shook my head. "You?" "Deadlines," he said, closing the screen. Then, after a pause, "Sit with me for a minute." I should have said no. I should have walked back upstairs. Instead, I sat. We talked about nothing, movies, music, the kind of random topics people use to fill silence, but underneath it all was that steady hum of tension. When thunder rolled outside, I flinched, and he smiled faintly. "You still hate storms." "How do you know that?" "You told me once, last year," he said. "I remember." Something in his voice made my pulse race. Remember. He remembered small things, details I'd forgotten I'd ever shared. The power flickered, the lights dimmed, and for a moment we were just shadows and candlelight. He looked at me, and I looked back, and neither of us moved. I could hear his breathing, calm but deep. He said quietly, "We should probably," but he didn't finish the sentence. I don't know who moved first, only that suddenly the space between us was gone. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from my face, and whispered, "Tell me to stop." I couldn't. My voice refused to work. Instead, I closed my eyes and let the moment take us wherever it wanted. What followed wasn't reckless, it was honest, fragile, and terrifying. We didn't speak much. Every glance, every small touch said more than words could. It was the kind of closeness that makes time dissolve. When we finally pulled away, breathless and shaken, we both knew the line we had crossed could never be uncrossed. He looked at me with a mix of wonder and regret. "This changes everything," he murmured. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. "I know." The next morning was quiet. We acted normal. Breakfast, dishes, polite conversation. But everything had changed. The world felt sharper, every movement charged with meaning. When our parents called from their trip, I answered as if nothing had happened, even as my hands trembled around the phone. For days, we avoided being alone together. Yet the more we tried to stay apart, the more impossible it became. Love, real love, has a way of slipping through cracks, finding light even in the places you try to hide it. One evening, I found him on the porch, watching the sunset. "We can't keep doing this," he said without turning. "I know," I whispered. "But how do we stop?" He finally faced me, eyes full of conflict. "Maybe when we're not living under the same roof." His words hurt, but I understood. Our parents were planning to move abroad in a year, maybe distance would save us. But the heart doesn't wait for perfect timing. It just loves. The year crawled by. We built invisible walls, short conversations, careful distance, but every now and then, they crumbled. A touch on the arm that lingered too long. A glance that said too much. On my birthday, he gave me a small silver locket. "For luck," he said simply. Inside was a photo he'd taken of the sea during one of our family trips. "It reminded me of you," he added softly. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to. When the day finally came for our parents to move abroad, the house felt strangely hollow. They hugged us, left instructions about bills and upkeep, and promised to visit soon. As their car disappeared down the road, silence filled the space they left behind. Ethan and I stood in the doorway, not looking at each other. "So," I said after a long moment, "what now?" He turned to me, that faint smile tugging at his lips. "Now we stop pretending." We didn't rush into anything. We talked, really talked, for the first time. About fear, guilt, the future, and whether what we felt was real or just the result of proximity and loneliness. But every answer came back to the same truth: what we felt was real. It had been real since the beginning. The months that followed were both beautiful and complicated. We told no one. We lived quietly, cautiously, yet every day felt like a new breath after holding it for too long. He'd cook dinner, I'd laugh at his terrible jokes. We took weekend drives, exploring places outside the city, hand in hand where no one knew us. Still, guilt lingered like a shadow. One night, I asked him, "Do you ever wish things were simpler?" He smiled sadly. "No. Because if they were, they wouldn't be ours." That was Ethan, steady, certain, grounded. And slowly, he taught me to be the same. A year later, when our parents decided to stay permanently overseas, we sold the house and moved to another city together. We told friends we were roommates at first. But love doesn't stay hidden forever. People talk, they guess, they assume. Some accepted it, others didn't. We learned to stop explaining. The world always finds something to judge, but happiness is its own defense. Ethan proposed to me on a quiet evening by the sea. There was no grand speech, just honesty. "I know it's complicated," he said, "but I also know that my life makes sense only when you're in it." I said yes through tears. We married in a small ceremony far from anyone who knew our story. It wasn't rebellion, it was peace. The kind of peace that comes from choosing love over fear. Years have passed now. Sometimes I still think of that stormy night when everything began, the flickering candlelight, the sound of rain, the way his voice trembled when he said my name. It feels like another lifetime, yet it's the foundation of this one. We built a life together, a home filled with laughter, art, music, and the ordinary magic of two people who chose each other against the odds. When people ask how we met, we just smile and say, "Our parents introduced us." It's true, though not the whole truth. The real story lives quietly between us, in the way he looks at me across a crowded room, In the way our hands find each other without thinking, in the way every morning feels like a new beginning. Sometimes, on stormy nights, we light a single candle and sit together in silence. The thunder rolls, the lights flicker, and he'll reach for my hand, just like he did that first night. And in that moment, I remember every step that brought us here, every glance, every fear, every choice. Love doesn't always follow the rules. But when it's real, it becomes the rule by which you live. And so, even now, when I look at Ethan, the man who was once my stepbrother, now my husband, my best friend, my forever, I don't think of the forbidden beginning. I think of the courage it took to listen to the heart instead of the world. Because sometimes the night that changes everything doesn't ruin you. It saves you. It rewrites the meaning of home, of family, of love itself.